thought I'd ever say this, but did the FIA actually do something popular for once? Well, kind of. The timing of it is still very suspicious, though. Unfortunately, though, I have to acknowledge the passing of Eddie Jordan. That was a really sad blow to the community. We will really miss you, Eddie. You were a real gem to us all, a really good voice, and a bastion of privateer teams in the modern age. So, we'll miss you, Eddie. But as Formula One keeps marching on, we also have to acknowledge that even though this news may be interesting to us, it is funny how this news dropped right as rally drivers staged their own quiet protest at the WRC event. Some refused to speak out much, others answered in their own native language to dodge the FIA swearing ban. You gotta respect them for exploiting the loophole, but knowing the FIA, they'll find some way to punish them anyway with that moral injury thing. Because wouldn't you know it, at roughly the same time as that news breaking out in the World Rallying Championship, the V10 debate in Formula One is back, and with more substance than ever. But this time though, it really does feel real, and nostalgia, oh, it's making me hope that it's real. Because if you grew up with F1 in the 90s and the 2000s, you would recognise this sound. But unfortunately, the timing is just way too convenient for me to ignore. Because this kind of headline-generating story, it would naturally attract a broader audience because it taps into the collective memory of what made F1 exciting for so many. In contrast, the work of the World Rally Drivers Association and this silent but also polite protest, it's of course a very significant step forward and a hugely important part of the movement. It is still a relatively niche subject for many casual fans, especially for people who only follow Formula One and therefore wouldn't have much interest in the world of rallying. Because seriously, this shift in focus towards something so memorable with older F1 fans and in a sport which has become so globally immense, it can have the effect of reducing the traction of the protest story, simply because there's only so much media attention to go around. And even laddermen like myself might be tempted to talk about V10s and the prospect of them coming back. Oh, that's exciting. But I will not go quietly into the night, good sir, or madam, or anything in between, because I urge you to look into what's going on in the world of rallying, because that in of itself is incredibly important. Because quite honestly, I'm surprised that Max Verstappen hasn't resorted to just answering questions in Dutch.
En natuurlijk zijn Lando en ik gewoon vrienden. Natuurlijk, we zijn concurrenten op de baan, maar in het dagelijks leven...
God damn that moon speak, that kind of sounds like English sometimes, but actually isn't. And even if there was no deliberate plan to overshadow the rally protest, the outcome could be seen as a desired one for the FIA, or from the perspective of those who prefer a positive headline-grabbing story over a contentious protest, because let's be real, any single mention of V10s is going to attract attention. If Ben Sulayem is going to shout into the ether, V10s, yes or no? People are just going to go, yeah! Because it really taps into my soul. I really mean it. I'm not playing it up. I would love to hear once again the shriek of a V10 Cozza. In any case, the news itself revolves, you get it, because pistons, they do revolutions, and about the idea of reintroducing the classic V10 engines into F1, an idea that has captured the imagination of many fans and insiders alike, as I just mentioned. And what makes this all the more tantalising is that there's growing evidence and physical examples of a simple internal combustion engine being run on sustainable fuels without a significant compromise in performance or loudness. Because I don't think you need me to tell you about all the stuff that Sebastian Vettel has been doing with the Race Without Trace campaign, with those two cars as part of his own private collection, the Nigel Mansell 92 Williams and Senna's 93 McLaren, being retrofitted so that means their engines can actually operate with sustainable fuels, and they sound just as good as ever. It can be done. And even though, admittedly, it does go against the grain of what is the trend in the automotive sector at the moment, just for the nostalgia fans and many people alike for the spectacle thing, oh, for entertainment value, oh, it's an absolute boom of an idea. Not to mention that it kind of works already in Formula 3, since this year, the entire formula, the third tier before Formula 1, runs entirely on sustainable fuels for 2025, in preparation for F1 to do the same in 2026. And there are many manufacturers that are starting to reconsider their all-electric options and rolling back their targets or pushing the deadline further into the future. It's looking a little bit precarious as to whether or not all-electric is the real way to go here, that maybe sustainable fuels might be an avenue after all, in order to keep all the combustion engines that they already have. But that's a whole other debate for this video. We're talking about whether or not V10s could actually be something that F1 could use for the future. In my honest opinion, 2030, Absolutely, especially if the 2026 regulations turn out to be an absolute dud. But ultimately, as part of this video, I'm sure you want to know, are V10s coming back officially? Well, short answer, officially, no. But the FIA is working on that to maybe make it happen sometime soon. Because Ben Sulayem is keen on the idea, even though not many people are keen on him, and the boss of F1 Stefano Domenicali says sustainable fuels could make it possible. Even Bernie Ecclestone had his 2 cents about it, but as of now, no concrete plans for 2028 or anything. Just a lot of noise. Pun very much intended. So you could say the old fossil fueled this. But in all seriousness, this idea has legs. This move could potentially lead to engines that would be lighter, simpler, cheaper to develop compared to the current complex V6 hybrid power units that are only looking to get even more complex but also simpler, bizarrely. And even though next year's regulations are set to remove the MGU-H part of the power unit, which arguably seems to be the most complex part of it all, and not to mention, with this brand new power unit comes fears of what happened in 2014. Now, if you weren't around Formula One around that time a decade ago, when they moved from V8s to V6 turbo hybrids, the difference in 1 year was absolutely cataclysmically bad. V8s in of themselves are still really beautiful to hear, but with those V6 turbo hybrid vacuums, Formula One, Bernie Ecclestone, they didn't take into account for the fact that they barely sounded of anything. It was relatively quiet for Formula One. It was ridiculous. It was shocking. It was horrifying. I barely watched that year. 2015, I don't recollect at all. It was only 2016 when the sound actually started to get good again. And arguably, some people might be saying, well, why do you need to do even anything, Law? Why don't you just up the revolutions per minute to 15,000 if you want a V6 shriek? Well, that's all very well and good. But many people who are nostalgic out there, including the Race in Their Own podcast, bring back V10! But in all honesty, we could have a V8. But according to the original source, Automotor and Sport, via the translated F1 oversteer, there is a furious debate going on behind the scenes as to how to solve this new powertrain coming in and how to make it more appealing. As you can tell from this segment of the article alone, there is a lot of chaos and hubbub going on behind the scenes, and they're really not sure whether or not this new regulation will even work. Ahem. Journalist Michael Schmidt was speaking on Automotor and Sport's YouTube channel about some proposed upcoming rule changes. It was put to Schmidt that next year's regulations are a hot topic in the paddock already, and the rumours suggest that the rules might be completely mixed up again in a few years. Responding to this, he said, yes, it was actually brought up, I think, briefly during testing, that Stefano Domenicali thought about it briefly and said, well, the V10 with sustainable fuel is actually what we need. It's a smaller, lighter, cheaper engine, a simpler engine that everyone could build. Everyone is a bit worried that the balance we have now would be like me driving, but that it will fall apart in the next few years because someone builds by far the best engine or the best car. That's why some people are extremely nervous, and that was an increase with Mohammed bin Sulayem bringing up the idea of extending the current rules by 2 years and then going straight to the V10, which of course isn't practical. Practicality is such a boring reason to not do things, is it? But, I mean, practicality is practically practical. Annoyingly so. So even though the FIA president's contribution contributed to the fraught concerns over the upcoming powertrain, there is still a genuine concern that these new rules, whilst helping out the FIA and F1's commitment to net zero emissions by 2030, it could become far too complex as the engine freeze since 2022 will cease, which means that we will get a development race restoring itself once again next year. And the only reason we had an engine freeze in the first place was to make sure that Red Bull could give it a go to make their own engines in the fullness of time. That's why we've not seen in recent times the brake horsepower amount get to ridiculous levels and then engines blowing up. It's because they've made the same power unit for 3 or 4 years now. They've now know how to make it reliable. And speaking of development races, Mercedes are tipped to be the strongest out of all the manufacturers for this new power unit. And those concerns about one team or supplier ruling over the others for the rest of the decade, that's not good for F1's bottom line if there's little competition, since the next potential chance to change the powertrain wouldn't come around until 2030, when maybe a newer solution could be found. And I remember seeing an article as early as last year on Autosport about Stefano Domenicali being asked about V8s, V10s in relation to Vettel, and saying that, you know what, in 2030 that might not be a bad idea when we're thinking about the power unit regulations again. And I thought that was the end of that. I was thinking, Okay, that seems like a cool idea. It means you can have all sorts of powertrains, not just electric. You can have hybrid, you can have regular petrol with sustainable fuels, you can have things for various applications. But it seems like the desire to move toward that mode of propulsion has grown, with the FIA under Ben Sulayem desperately wanting to be popular again, and now apparently setting up a committee, a working body and group in fact, to talk about the viability of moving to V10s. So if the governing body decides to go along with this to try and get themselves popular again, the F1 teams might have to go with it despite sinking billions and billions into making the brand new engines coming for next year. These new engines that are being developed and have been developed for the last 4 years, they could be scrapped. V10s coming in, and sure, they might be simpler, cheaper, and basically far less complex to produce, but all of that money that these teams would have sunk into it, it would be gone, it would be wasted. And it wouldn't exactly be relevant for F1 constantly saying all the time that, oh, we are the pinnacle of motorsport and technology. Well, that's not where things are going right now, guys. I mean, at least it's not going to be, according to some people, saying it could happen as early as next year we go to V10s. Really? No. I'm not an engine guy. I know nothing about mechanics. But even I know that you cannot do that in just under 12 months. Well, I mean, not reliably so. So while support from the fan base is huge for bringing back these classic engines, there is a significant amount of skepticism attached to it as well, amongst experts. Because the sport is already invested heavily in the current technology, the new regulations, they're well advanced. It was one of the main reasons F1 was able to convince the likes of Audi to come into the sport, throwing to the wayside every other motorsport he was part of. Then, of course, getting Honda to not depart F1 for the billionth time when it shockingly exited with Red Bull, and then didn't, despite the fact they were winning again. And as for General Motors, I mean, my goodness, do you remember all of the hoops that the Andretti bid had to go through to try and even get heard by Formula One management, including a commitment from General Motors to provide power units from 2028 based on the regulations for next year? If the FIA just suddenly went like, oh no, forget those, we're gonna go to V10s, woo!
Hey, non-ladder man law here. Well, it turns out I thought Cadillac would be opposed to it. In reality, according to some reports, they might actually be in support of this move, and it might explain why 2028 was an idea for them to join as a power unit supplier. Maybe they knew something that no other team did. Maybe they might be ahead of the game. Maybe Cadillac might have the best V10 power unit out of all of them. Ooh. Anyway, back to the video.
But either way, billions of dollars have been sunk into developing these engines from all parties, so if the FAA suddenly decided to change the engine right now, what does it mean for those 3 manufacturers? The promise made to them would be broken. In fact, as some may suggest, if the FIA flips the script now, could Audi take legal action perhaps? Maybe. More likely though, they flex their influence behind the scenes to push back on any drastic changes. And most importantly, if they are going to do this, if they are going to bring back a V10 unit with e-fuels, it has to be ratified by as early as the start of next season. Because remember, the ratification process from the V8s to the V6 turbos, that was ratified in the middle of 2011, 2.5 years before we actually saw them turning, but going, what? What, are they actually running? What? What? It would have to be incredibly obvious that the new power units were no good. And also for this to happen, V10s coming back in 2028, it would have to be incredibly obvious that the new power units we're getting next year were no good. And several drivers, including Max Verstappen, would be vocal about their concerns with it and the regulatory direction of F1. Other high-profile drivers may criticize them further, the fans may not like them, and they actually may consider leaving the sport earlier than expected, drivers and fans. And yes, I know F1's overall popularity is driven on more than just engine power, noise, and the overall format of the sport, but these are core parts that keep some of the older fans around, and as we have seen throughout many eras of social media, and of course, analytics from various websites, if you mention that V10s may come back, it's going to generate hype. Lots and lots of hype. That's exactly what the FIA needs right now. So for a series which has become quite addicted to its popularity and prominence in mainstream media, I reckon that the idea of reviving V10s would be more of a negotiating tactic or an insurance policy in case the new technology doesn't pan out as expected, but I do believe the current FIA president will try everything possible to come up with a practical plan for the near future. So in essence, while the V10 proposal is generating a lot of excitement and positive buzz, it does for now remain a speculative concept, because there are other technological commitments Formula One has to make before you can even think about completely changing the power unit. So my spanner of speculation, I am holding it aloft right now, right here, and telling you, it sounds nice, but hold up. Having said that though, if what Ben Sulayem said is true, which I kind of doubt, that if there is going to be a working body, a working group looking into the viabilities of V10s, maybe the FIA has consulted with various power unit manufacturers as to whether or not they would find it feasible or practical. And it might actually be somewhat connected to what Audi's been saying regarding their own future plans for powertrains. After all, Audi is planning to pivot away from its all-electric movement slated for 2032, and is instead looking for other options to try and stand out in a world where demand for EVs is plateauing. I mean, since quite honestly, China is completely romping away with the domination in that particular market. I, for example, have seen not just a few miles away from my house, a BYD dealership, and I never thought I would ever see that not too far from where I live. It's absolutely crazy, and admittedly, BYDs, they do look really good. I mean, some of the names are a little bit odd, but they stick in your head. The BYD seal? I mean, I remember it, so I guess it's done its job. So when you take that into consideration, what's going on in China and them going all in with EVs, the Western markets are sort of wavering about their commitments and trying to find ways they currently make their combustion engines work with modern fuels so they can actually cut down their carbon emissions. Synthetic fuels might be the most practical option. Audi, Porsche, all the German manufacturers are really into synthetic fuels. And not to mention Saudis, because that sustainable fuel in Formula 3 is being provided by Aramco of all people. What a surprise. Honda, historically known for vacillating their placement in F1, I'm not so sure about that either. And Toyota, their potential plans to maybe dip their toes back into F1 with Haas, that could be derailed as well. There are so many unknowns here. But let's break down the comparisons. The 2026 F1 powertrain is built around a V6 turbo hybrid design that uses a combo of combustion engine and electric energy recovery system, basically 50-50. The setup is highly sophisticated. It's been developed to push performance to new heights by giving drivers an extra boost from the electric motor, which can enhance acceleration and overall efficiency. However, something that has come up time and time again is the fact that it's still a really complex bit of kit. And even though it's been technically and theoretically simplified with the removal of the MGUH part of the entire recovery system, it is still something that has needed lots and lots of money poured into it, and there's something to say about whether or not it will be reliable in the long run, or appealing as an actual means of propulsion for an F1 car. So the jury's out with that one. In contrast, a V10 engine running on sustainable fuel would be a more traditional design. And as we've seen with Vettel and his efforts to convert old cars with sustainable fuels, it's popular because people don't notice. Without the extra layers of hybrid technology, it would likely offer a more direct, linear power delivery and the classic thrilling sound that many fans miss. However, you wouldn't get any benefit from electrical systems to try and back up the power system, so all of those horsepower would have to be developed from the engine itself. So we may see, in of itself, a reduction in brake horsepower in general, and of course, times would be slower. Having said that though, V10s in 2005 did reach 1,000 brake horsepower, so it is possible to recover from it, but going back to square one, having teams that have basically thrown their V10 schematics in the bin, we might see a few years of development where engine power is relatively low, several seconds behind where it is right now, with no batteries to support it. So as you can tell, the trade-off is essentially between cutting-edge performance with a complex high-cost system versus a more straightforward, cost-effective design that might not quite reach the same performance levels on the track. Boiled down, while the V10 sustainable fuel model is an attractive idea, tapping into the nostalgia of classic F1 sound and potentially offering a simpler, less costly engine, the practical hurdles are enormous. Teams have spent years preparing for next season, and if we find out that just in a couple of years' time, it's all going to be thrown on the scrap heap and then replaced with something that could easily be made and with relatively low cost, and with the cost cap being higher, I mean, the development war in that could be absolutely immense, they might plow more money into it than ever. There's no telling about how a team could actually sustain itself. All that time and effort would be put to waste. How would they be able to make use of it instead of it just becoming waste and unfulfilled potential? But it ultimately depends on these first couple of seasons with this new power unit, whether or not it turns out to be popular, if it sounds good, and whether the drivers even like it. Because if it's a no on all counts and it's just purely unpopular, then at least this might be a backup plan. If the FIA were to push such a radical change, it's very likely that manufacturers have already committed vast resources to the current turbo hybrid platform. They might oppose the move unless they were given plenty of notice of the change or compensated for the time and money poured into what was believed to be a power unit that would be used for at least a minimum of 4 seasons. They might resort to legal challenges even, political pressure, maybe even threatening to quit the sport altogether. After many years, you can tell that Formula One has desperately wanted Audi to join them, and if they suddenly say behind the scenes that, hey, cut out that nonsense or we're gonna go, then this V10 conversation will be dropped, or at least not before 2030. So whilst this idea is a really fascinating one from a theoretical standpoint, practically it's just something that is not feasible at this time. We all dread about what's going to be seen with this new power unit. We remember 2014 really badly, but there is no telling how this is actually going to be received if and only if they prove to be incredibly difficult to operate, maintain, extremely unreliable, unpopular with fans, the manufacturers themselves call for change. Only then could it move to a simpler model of internal combustion with environmentally friendly fuels. Maybe that's what, maybe, and I'm going to get the foam of doubt out for this one, maybe this might explain why Sebastian Vettel dropped being a director of the GPDA. Maybe he's being brought into this V10 working group to work with the FIA to try and make this a reality. Because his race without trace stuff, it's already there. He's already done it with classic 90s engines. Who's to say whether or not they might actually be commissioned this operation, and then that's the way Sebastian Vettel gets back into Formula One and then ultimately becomes the king of Formula One. And I think right now people would love to see that because he's all about the environment, and if this is the way to do it with existing technology and it costs far less and it's something that is really, really accessible, this could be the winning formula. Absolutely. I would say bring it on. Either way, even though it's not practical at the moment, expect this talk about V10s, V8s, whatever, to just get louder and louder and louder. And if F1 is listening, they might just surprise us. But I doubt we will see this change happen before the decade is out, unless the new engines prove to be really, really bad. What is also perceived to be very, very bad is once again Helmut Marko. Has his latest wave of criticism toward young drivers, including his own man Isaac Hadjar, proved to be the biggest wake-up call yet as to the question of young drivers and mental health? To find out why I believe this could herald a beginning of a complete revolution of the Red Bull Junior program, watch this video next, straight after this one.